Welcome back to the All Sorts podcast, where we like to dive into the weird and the wonderful and mysterious.
Exactly.
And today we are talking about something truly bizarre.
Yeah.
Red rain.
Red rain.
Now, when I say red rain, I don't just mean like a little bit of pink tint in the water.
No.
I'm talking full-on crimson downpours.
Blood red.
Yeah, exactly. Like something out of, a biblical prophecy.
Right.
And this isn't just like a one-off event. This happened multiple times throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
But today we're going to be focusing on a specific region that has experienced this phenomenon quite a bit. Kerala, India.
Right.
So the question is, what is going on in Kerala?
Yeah. What's causing this?
Why is the sky raining blood?
Good question.
But not literally blood, but
Well,
it looks like it.
It really does.
So to set the scene, let's talk about one of the most well-documented cases of red rain in Kerala, which occurred in 2001.
Okay.
Now, for about 2 months, starting in July, people in Kerala started reporting this strange red rain.
Wow.
It was heavy rain too.
Really?
And it would stain clothes pink.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't just like a continuous downpour either. It kind of came and went sporadically over those 2 months.
Interesting. So it was like very localized and intense almost.
Yeah, and get this, there were even reports of other colors, like yellow, green, and black rain mixed in there.
Really? Other colors too?
Yeah, it's like a whole rainbow of rain,
Yeah.
but with a very eerie red dominating.
That's fascinating.
So naturally, scientists were pretty baffled.
Of course. Yeah.
They started investigating,
Well,
trying to figure out what could possibly cause this.
right.
And initially, the most obvious explanation seemed to be things like, dust from the Arabian desert,
Oh, yeah.
or maybe volcanic ash from,
Yeah.
a distant eruption.
Right.
But after analyzing the rainwater, they ruled both of those theories out.
Interesting. So it wasn't something simple like that?
No, something much stranger.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
So what do they find?
Well, what they discovered was that the red rain was actually caused by algae.
Algae.
Yeah, algae.
Like the stuff that grows in ponds?
Exactly, but a very specific type of green algae called Trentipolia annulata.
Wait, hold on. Green algae causing red rain.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But Trentipolia annulata contains a very strong orange pigment that gives it a reddish appearance.
Right.
And this algae is incredibly common. It's found on trees, rocks, even lampposts. Yeah, and it releases these tiny reproductive cells called spores into the air.
Oh.
So what seems to have happened is that a massive amount of these spores got swept up into the atmosphere and then came down with the rain, giving it that striking red hue.
So it's like a giant algae bloom, but in the sky.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
That is wild.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
But, okay, so how did so many spores get concentrated in those specific areas to create such intense red rain?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah,
We
right.
know Trentipolia is the culprit, but the exact mechanisms behind such a massive spore release are still being debated. Some scientists believe that the heavy monsoon rains in the weeks leading up to the red rain might have triggered this synchronized release of spores,
Okay.
but how they got transported and concentrated into the rain clouds over such localized areas is still a mystery.
So it's like we have the who, but not the how.
Exactly. It's a puzzle that continues to intrigue scientists.
It is fascinating, though. I mean, this seemingly simple explanation of algae,
Right.
it opens up so many more questions.
It really does. It challenges our understanding of, how interconnected our environment really is and how these tiny organisms can have such a dramatic impact on the world around us.
Right. And it also just kind of reminds us that even seemingly ordinary things like rain
Yeah,
can hold these crazy mysteries that we're still trying to figure out.
absolutely. Nature is full of surprises.
Yeah, okay. But before we get too deep into the science, I have to bring up some of the more out there historical explanations for red rain.
Oh, yes, the more creative interpretations.
Exactly. Because, I mean, we're talking meteors, comets, even extraterrestrial life.
Alien rain.
Yeah, alien rain. You mentioned the panspermia hypothesis earlier.
I did.
Can you kind of unpack that for us? What exactly is that?
Sure. So panspermia is this fascinating idea that life on Earth didn't actually originate here,
Oh, wow.
but was brought here from somewhere else in the universe.
Okay.
Perhaps by comets or meteors carrying microorganisms?
Like little alien hitchhikers seeding our planet with life.
Exactly. It's a mind-boggling concept that has captivated scientists and science fiction writers for a long time.
It is pretty mind-boggling, and I can see why, with red rain especially, that connection would be made.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, oh, it's raining red, it must be alien blood or something.
Right?
So was there any evidence to support this theory in the case of the Kerala red rain?
Well, there was initial speculation about a possible meteor airburst.
Really?
Yeah, some people reported hearing a loud thunderclap and seeing a flash of light right before the red rain started.
Okay, so like a meteor exploding in the atmosphere?
Exactly, and that fueled speculation that maybe a meteor had scattered these mysterious red particles.
That does sound pretty convincing.
It does, but the evidence doesn't really support the extraterrestrial theory.
Okay, why not?
Well, for starters, how could debris from a single event continue falling for weeks or even months in the same localized areas?
That's true. I guess a meteor would be a much more, like, one and done kind of event.
Yeah, a much shorter time frame.
And we already have a pretty plausible earthly explanation with the Trentipolia spores, right?
Exactly. The mainstream scientific community overwhelmingly favors the algal spore explanation for the Kerala red rain.
So no aliens then?
Not in this case, at least.
Bummer.
But hey, it's still a fascinating possibility to consider.
True. You never know what science might uncover in the future.
Right.
And it's not like red rain has never been linked to meteors and comets before, right?
That's right. There have been a few intriguing historical examples.
Can you tell us about some of those?
Sure. There was a red rain event in Italy in 1872, and analysis showed that it contained particles very similar to those found in meteorites.
Wow, so that one sounds pretty convincing.
It does. And then there's the Tunguska event in Siberia in 1908, which involved a massive explosion likely caused by a meteoroid or comet fragment. And some reports suggest that red rain fell in the area afterward.
So the possibility of a cosmic connection is still on the table, even if it wasn't the case in Kerala.
Exactly. It's a reminder that there are still so many mysteries out there.
Absolutely. Okay, but speaking of Kerala, there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to discuss, the analysis of the red rain particles themselves.
Okay.
Now, some of the analysis identified carbon, oxygen, silicon, iron,
Yeah.
Pretty standard stuff.
Yeah, those are common elements.
But then get this, they also found amino acids,
Interesting.
which are the building blocks of life.
Right, the essential ingredients for life as we know it.
So does this finding lend any credence to the extraterrestrial theory?
Well, it's definitely an intriguing finding, but it doesn't automatically confirm an extraterrestrial origin.
Really, I thought amino acids were pretty unique to living things.
They are essential for life, but they can also be formed through abiotic processes, meaning without the involvement of life.
Oh, so like they can exist in space without needing aliens to create them.
Exactly, they've been found in meteorites, for example.
Huh. That makes sense.
So the amino acids in the Kerala red rain could have come from a variety of sources, terrestrial or extraterrestrial. We just don't have enough conclusive evidence to say for sure.
So as much as we might want to believe in alien rain, we can't jump to conclusions based on the Kerala red rain alone.
Right. We need more evidence to definitively say that those amino acids are from outer space.
Okay, so for now, the most plausible explanation is still those Trentipolia spores.
That's right. The evidence points to a more down-to-earth explanation.
Okay. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one, even if it's not as exciting as alien rain.
Exactly. But it doesn't make the phenomenon any less fascinating.
Right, there's still plenty of mystery surrounding it, and that's what keeps us curious.
Absolutely. The natural world is full of wonders that continue to challenge our understanding.
It sure is. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into the red rain of Kerala. From those bizarre red downpours to the possibility of alien spores.
Right. It's been a fascinating discussion.
It has, but there's still so much more to explore. We'll be back soon with part 2, where we'll delve deeper into the world of Trentipolia, explore those historical accounts of red rain in more detail, and even touch on how climate change might be playing a role in this phenomenon.
It's going to be a fascinating journey.
I can't wait, but before we go, I want to remind you to hit that subscribe button on the All Sorts Podcast YouTube channel so you don't miss part 2 of this incredible deep dive. And if you're enjoying the show, be sure to check out our other episodes. We've got a whole library of fascinating deep dives waiting for you. You can also find us on X, Instagram, and Threads for more behind-the-scenes content and to join the conversation. See you soon for part 2.
See you then. Welcome back to our deep dive into the red rain of Kerala. It's amazing how this phenomenon kind of bridges the gap between ancient myths and modern science.
It really is. We've got these ancient tales of blood raining from the sky, often seen as like bad omens or signs of, divine wrath.
Right.
And now here we are in the 21st century using, high-tech equipment to analyze these red particles and figure out what they really are.
Exactly. It's incredible how far we've come in terms of understanding the world around us, but it also makes you wonder how much we still don't know.
Right. And the thing is, red rain isn't just some, ancient legend. It's still happening today, which makes it even more intriguing.
Oh, absolutely. It's a reminder that nature is full of surprises, and we're still uncovering new mysteries all the time.
Speaking of uncovering mysteries, I've got a question about those red particles. We talked about the possibility of them being algae spores, and Trentipolia seems like the most likely culprit. But what about the reports of other colors? Like I've read accounts of yellow-green and even black rain in Kerala. Does that fit in with the algae explanation, or are we talking about something completely different?
That's a great question, and it actually strengthens the case for Trentipolia. You see, while we primarily associate it with that striking red color, remember, it's actually a green algae, so it contains chlorophyll, just like the plants in your garden.
So it's green, but it looks red.
Exactly. It's all about the pigments. Different species or even different growth stages of Trentipolia can produce varying amounts of those orange carotenoid pigments that give it that reddish appearance. So if you have a lot of those pigments, you get redder rain, less pigment, maybe a more yellowish or greenish hue.
So it's like nature's own paint palette, using algae to create all these different colors in the rain.
I like that analogy. And as for black rain, well, if a massive amount of those red spores got concentrated in a small area, the sheer density of them could make the rain appear almost black.
So it's all about concentration.
Exactly. The more concentrated the spores, the more intense the color.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've got our most likely culprit, Trentipolia, but I'm still kind of hung up on that whole meteor airburst idea you mentioned earlier, that there were some inconsistencies with that theory for the Kerala events, but wasn't there some initial evidence that pointed towards a meteor?
You're right. There were some early reports that seemed to support the meteor theory. Remember those accounts of a loud thunderclap and a flash of light right before the red rain started that could be consistent with a meteor exploding in the atmosphere?
Yeah, that sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does. And the fact that red rain has been reported in other parts of the world, sometimes coinciding with meteor showers, added fuel to that speculation.
So it's not like it's a completely far-fetched idea.
No, not at all. But the duration and localized nature of the red rain in Kerala were the main red flags. A meteor airburst would create a relatively short-lived event with debris scattering over a wide area. It wouldn't explain those persistent red rain showers happening in the same localized areas for weeks or even months.
It's true. I guess a meteor shower will be over pretty quickly.
Exactly. And let's not forget the sheer volume of those red particles. Some estimates suggest as much as 50,000 kilograms. It's hard to imagine a single meteor carrying that much biological material.
50,000 kilograms, that's like a whole herd of elephants.
It's a lot, to say the least. It seems far more likely that we're dealing with a massive localized bloom of Trentipolia rather than a meteor from outer space.
Okay, so if we're leaning towards the algae explanation, is there any chance those spores could have been carried over long distances, like from another continent? Maybe that would explain how such a massive amount ended up concentrated in Kerala?
That's an interesting thought, and it's not as implausible as it might sound. There's growing evidence that microorganisms, including algae spores, can be transported vast distances through the atmosphere. In fact, a 2015 study actually found that the Trentipolia annulata in the Kerala red rain was genetically similar to a species found in Austria.
Are you telling me that the algae that rained down on India might have originated in Europe?
That's precisely what the study suggests. It seems those tiny spores hitched a ride on global wind currents, traveled thousands of miles across continents, and then ended up in the rain clouds over Kerala.
That's mind-blowing. It really highlights how interconnected our world is, even at the microscopic level.
It's incredible, isn't it? It challenges our understanding of geographical boundaries and highlights the power of nature to disperse life across vast distances.
It's almost like these tiny algae spores are little explorers journeying across continents on the wind.
I love that imagery. It's a reminder that there's still so much we don't know about the natural world and that even the smallest organisms can have a global impact.
You're absolutely right. It's a humbling thought. Okay, so we've talked about the science behind red rain, but let's delve a little deeper into some of those other historical explanations. Before we had microscopes and DNA analysis, what did people think was causing this strange phenomenon?
Well, it's important to remember that for most of human history, people relied on mythology, folklore, and religious beliefs to explain the world around them. And when it came to something as dramatic and inexplicable as red rain, those explanations often involved supernatural forces or divine intervention.
That makes sense. I mean, if you saw blood red rain falling from the sky and you didn't know anything about algae spores, you'd probably come up with some pretty wild explanations too.
Exactly, and those explanations often reflected the cultural beliefs and values of the time. So, for example, in ancient Rome, red rain was sometimes linked to the god Vulcan, the god of fire and volcanoes. It was seen as a sign of his displeasure or a warning of volcanic eruptions to come.
So even back then, people were making connections between red rain and natural phenomena like volcanoes.
They were keen observers of the natural world, even if they didn't have the scientific tools to fully understand it.
That's fascinating. It shows that human curiosity about the world around us is as old as time itself.
Absolutely, and that curiosity has driven us to explore, to experiment, and to ultimately develop the scientific methods that we use today.
So even though those early explanations might seem fantastical to us now, they were an important step in our journey to understanding the world.
Exactly. They represent the beginnings of scientific thought, the first attempts to make sense of the unknown.
And speaking of making sense of the unknown, let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the more recent scientific research into red rain. We've already delved into the Kerala events, but have there been any other notable studies or findings worth discussing?
There have been researchers around the world have continued to investigate red rain and have uncovered some fascinating insights. For instance, one study focused on a red rain event in Zambezi Valley in southern Africa. In 2016, they were able to analyze the chemical composition of the rainwater in great detail, and you know what they found?
Don't tell me more algae.
You got it, but this time it was a different type of algae called Hematococcus pluvialis. This particular algae is known for producing a bright red pigment called astaxanthin, which is a powerful antioxidant.
So even though the specific algae might be different, it seems like the algae spore explanation is pretty consistent across the board.
That seems to be the emerging consensus, yes.
Okay, so case closed, right?
Well, not quite. Remember, science is always evolving. There's always more to learn. For example, some scientists are now looking into the role of bacteria in red rain. There's evidence that certain bacteria, particularly those found in soil, can produce pigments that could contribute to the red coloration.
So maybe it's not always algae alone. Maybe it's a combination of algae bacteria. Who knows what else?
Exactly. It could be a complex cocktail of microorganisms all playing a role in creating red rain.
Now that adds another layer of complexity to this already fascinating phenomena.
And then there's the role of wind patterns, atmospheric conditions, even climate change. All of these factors could influence the transport and deposition of these microorganisms, leading to red rain events in different parts of the world.
It's like a giant interconnected web with all these different threads coming together to create this amazing spectacle.
It's a beautiful way to think about it, and it reminds us that even seemingly isolated events like red rain are connected to a much larger system.
Okay, so we've talked about what causes red rain, but what about the impact? Does it have any negative effects?
That's a good question. In most cases, red rain caused by algae spores is probably harmless. After all, those spores are naturally occurring and ubiquitous in the environment.
So it's not like toxic rain or anything?
Not usually, but there are some situations where it could be a cause for concern. For example, some types of algae can produce toxins. If those toxins were present in high enough concentrations in the rainwater, they could potentially contaminate water sources or pose a risk to human health.
That's a little unsettling. Have there been any documented cases of red rain causing health problems?
To my knowledge, there haven't been any widespread reports of red rain causing major health problems, but it's something that scientists are keeping an eye on, especially as red rain events seem to be becoming more frequent in some parts of the world.
More frequent. Is there a reason for that?
It's hard to say for sure, but climate change could be playing a role as global temperatures rise and weather patterns shift. We're seeing more extreme weather events, including heavy rainfall and droughts. These changes could be creating conditions that are more favorable for certain types of algae to thrive and release their spores into the atmosphere.
So red rain could be another indicator of our changing climate, a sort of warning sign that things are out of balance.
It's a possibility, yes, and it highlights the importance of continuing to study this phenomenon and understanding its potential impacts on our planet and our health.
It's a reminder that everything is interconnected, and that even these seemingly bizarre events can provide valuable insights into the health of our planet. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive, from the global travels of algae spores to the potential impacts of climate change. But there's still more to explore. We'll be back soon with part 3, where we'll delve into the cultural significance of red rain, its depiction in art and literature, and discuss some of the ongoing research that's shedding new light on this age-old mystery.
I'm looking forward to continuing our exploration.
Me too, and I hope our listeners are as captivated by this phenomenon as we are in the meantime. Don't forget to subscribe to the All Sorts podcast on YouTube and follow us on X, Instagram, and Threads for more fascinating deep dives into all sorts of mind-boggling topics. We'll see you soon for part 3. And welcome back to the All Sorts podcast for the thrilling conclusion of our deep dive into the red rain of Kerala.
Thrilling is right. I mean, who knew algae could be so captivating?
Right, like we spent the last 2 episodes talking about, spores and pigments and wind currents. Yeah. But it's amazing how this seemingly simple explanation of algae has opened up so many other avenues of, scientific and historical and even like cultural exploration.
It really has. It's like this one phenomenon, this red rain, has touched upon so many different aspects of human experience and understanding.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're going to be focusing on in this final episode.
Yeah.
We've talked about the science, we've talked about the possible meteor connections.
Right.
But now I want to kind of circle back to something we touched upon earlier, the cultural significance of red rain. Mm-hmm. Because throughout history, this phenomenon has really captured the imaginations of people worldwide.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a source of wonder and fear and inspiration for centuries. I mean, we're talking about myths, legends, religious rituals, works of art, apocalyptic prophecies, all inspired by this one strange occurrence.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, like how something is, seemingly simple as rain, turning red.
Yeah.
Can evoke such strong emotions and such a wide range of interpretations across different cultures.
Mm-hmm. It really speaks to the power of nature to kind of, inspire awe and wonder and sometimes even terror in us humans.
Right. Like it reminds us that we're not really in control.
Yeah.
Nature can do some pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah, it definitely puts things in perspective.
So can you give us some specific examples of how red rain has been depicted in art, literature, mythology throughout history?
Oh, there are so many great examples. For instance, in ancient Greece, red rain was sometimes associated with the god Zeus.
Okay.
And it was seen as a sign of his anger or a warning of, impending war or disaster.
Oh, wow. So like a divine punishment kind of thing.
Exactly. And then you have Norse mythology, where red rain was linked to the Valkyries, these mythical female figures who, decided who would live and die in battle.
Okay.
And the rain was said to be the blood of fallen warriors staining the sky, red as a sign of the god's favor.
So red rain could be a good omen or a bad omen, depending on who you ask?
Exactly. It all depended on the cultural context and the specific beliefs of the people interpreting it.
And these aren't just ancient myths, right? I mean, red rain has shown up in more modern works of literature and art as well.
Oh, absolutely. One of the most striking examples that comes to mind is from Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar.
Okay.
There's a scene where Calpurnius, Caesar's wife, has a dream of a statue of Caesar bleeding from 100 wounds with Romans bathing their hands in the blood.
Oh, wow.
And this dream is interpreted as a bad omen. And, shortly after Caesar is assassinated.
So even in a fictional context, red rain is used as this powerful symbol of tragedy and, upheaval.
Exactly. It's a very evocative image. It taps into our primal fears and fascinations.
It does make you wonder if those, historical interpretations, those ancient fears and fascinations, do they still influence how we perceive red rain today?
I think they do to some extent. Even though we have a scientific explanation for it now, there's still a part of us that can't help but feel a sense of awe or even unease when we see, those crimson drops falling from the sky.
Yeah, like it's such a striking visual. It's hard not to feel something when you see it.
Right. And, for most of human history, blood has been associated with injury, death sacrifice, these very powerful concepts.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that seeing rain tinged with that same crimson hue might trigger a kind of visceral reaction, even if we consciously know it's just algae spores.
Right. Like it's almost like it's hardwired into our brains to, see red and think danger or, something significant is happening.
Exactly. We carry those ancient associations with us, whether we're aware of them or not.
So even though science has given us a rational explanation for red rain, there's still this element of, mystery and intrigue that surrounds it.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes it so captivating. It's a reminder that the world is still full of wonders and that we're still discovering new things all the time.
Yeah, it's humbling in a way, like we might think we have it all figured out.
Right.
But then nature throws us a curveball like red rain. Yeah. And we're reminded of just how much we still don't know.
It's a good reminder to stay curious and keep exploring.
Okay, so we've talked about the science, the history, the cultural interpretations. But what about the future of red rain research? What are some of the big questions that scientists are still trying to answer?
Well, one of the key areas of focus is understanding the triggers for those mass releases of algae spores. What are the specific environmental conditions that lead to these blooms?
Okay.
And how do factors like, wind patterns and temperature and rainfall play a role in transporting those spores and concentrating them in certain areas?
And what about the impact of climate change? I mean, we talked about how, rising temperatures and shifting weather patterns could be creating conditions that are more favorable for algae blooms.
Right. That's definitely something that researchers are looking into, whether climate change is contributing to the increasing frequency of red rain events.
It's like a giant puzzle with so many different pieces, and we're just starting to put it all together.
It's a fascinating puzzle, though, and the more pieces we find, the more we understand about our planet and how it works.
Well said. Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about red rain, from its mysterious origins to its cultural significance and everything in between.
It's been a great deep dive. I've really enjoyed exploring this topic with you.
Me too, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as well, if you're as fascinated by red rain as we are. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to some of the articles and research we discussed today.
Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff out there.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the All Sorts podcast on YouTube for more thought-provoking deep dives into all sorts of weird and wonderful topics. You can also follow us on X, Instagram, and Threads to join the conversation, and let us know what you think.
We love hearing from our listeners.
We do. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those eyes open to the wonders of the world around you.
And who knows, maybe you'll even witness some red rain for yourself one day.
Maybe we will. Thanks for listening.